Phyrexia, all will be one spoiler season is upon us. Planeswalkers are getting completed, and speaking of that, new Jace is trash. Let's talk about the spoilers I am most excited for when it comes to this brand new set. Whenever a brand new Magic the Gathering set drops, everyone turns to the spoilers and think, which of these cards am I going to slam? Who's going to play what against me? And tournament spikes around the world seek to optimize their decks. Now, I've picked a handful of Phyrexia all will be one spoilers that I'm most excited for. And if you're not a tournament spike, don't go anywhere. These are cards that I think are going to be fun to cast. There are some cards that are going to be crazy powerful and, might even see bans. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I think there's some cards the community is way too high on and actually aren't that good. I'm going to get into those as well. But let's kick off our spoiler review with some of that fun I was just talking about. We are going to start today with the capricious Hellraiser. The 6-drop Phyrexian Dragon has a 3 cost reduction if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. It obviously has flying. It's a dragon. Look at its freaking wings. But it's got this neat ability. It says, when it enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard. Choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them. Copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. We've seen the community take to, red or even is it value strategies like this before. You have things like Demilich, you have Arclight Phoenix, which are these low to the ground spell casting, even as going as far as, in Pioneer, you got things like Sprite Dragon and Crackling Drake that just really lean into this strategy. Now, I don't know if this card is good enough to crack those lists. The cost reduction is pretty steep. You got to have 9 cards in your graveyard, and if you're running things like Treasure Cruise, you're probably not going to have as many cards in your graveyard for as long in those formats, but it's really fun. This is the epitome of fun card design in my mind. Like, you get good value, but then the value you get is at random, right? You and your friends are going to sit at the table, you're going to flip these cards and be like, oh, I hope I get this one, and I didn't. Oh, so I think this is amazing card design. This is on the top of my for fun list. I think it's going to be a blast. Now, I know that there's probably a much better brewer than me that will break some of these cards. I'll preface this with that, but man, I'm excited to have some fun with this card. And speaking of fun with cards, moving on to the next card, and we're going to touch on this one briefly and then get into some serious high-level play cards. But Encroaching Microsynth is another card that I don't know, with a 4-drop that, it manipulates the field right when it comes to play, but it's got no ETB, and it does cost 4. It's got a very powerful and unique effect. So it says, when non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types, the same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So this turns everything you have into artifacts. Things like affinity, things like cost reduction for artifacts really play well off this. I think someone, again, much smarter than me, is going to break this card. I want to put it on my radar because I'm excited to see what happens. Moving on to our first competitive card, and maybe a candidate for a ban already, well, not already, but might be a candidate for a ban if someone figures out how to build it, is the venerated Rot Priest. This card leans into the toxic motif, a 1/2 for 1, a Phyrexian Druid. Neither of those card types, I think, are super important in more of our extended formats. Maybe in Standard, we'll see something with Phyrexian, but it's got Toxic 1, which players dealt damage by this get poison counter. It says, whenever a creature you control becomes the target of spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. So target of a spell, not target of a spell your opponent controls, target of a spell. I really think this is going to turn on a ton of poison strategies. I'm looking at you, Legacy, possibly Modern. I don't know if there's enough support in Pioneer for Toxic, for poison counters to really make a dent, but there might be. In Pioneer, having a lower power curve, maybe poison counters can get there. So I know Limited and Standard, we're going to see a lot of white-green poison counters, but this card has an opportunity to just get banned, right? This is going to exponentially add poison counters to your opponents, and for those that play poison counters in Commander, you know who I'm looking at. This card is going to be an auto-include. I really think this is a good card in the rare slot. This is going to be fun to see. Or, if you don't like poison counters, it's not going to be fun to see. Moving on, we have another commander card that, man, oh man, just seems, this archetype seems to be printed in every set. Izuri, Stalker of Spheres, is the green-blue value engine, and I think this is also amazing card design. It says, when it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3, so that bumps the total cost up to 7. If you do, proliferate twice, meaning everything that has a counter, everything, you can add another counter of that type to that thing. This is cool, but it costs a ton. It also has the line that's most important that I skipped here. Whenever you proliferate, draw a card. That line, I believe, is going to be more important than the additional cost to proliferate twice when it ETBs. The fact that you can proliferate and draw a card really gives you a good option as a commander for these counter strategies in green-blue that also gives you some card draw. And Commander, man, card draw is key. You cannot stop. Any archetype I play, any format I play, I love me some card draw. The idea that people are out there in Modern playing 8-cast, like, or I just want to play that deck because I get to draw cards. I know you draw cards, you stir, you don't do anything. And speaking of that, that is why this next card is on my list. You already know what it is. It is Phyrexian Arena, the simplest of card draw, the most elegant of mono black card draw. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Now, this card is not like gonna break anything wide open. I am just excited to see mono black strategies lean into this and essentially say, you know what, I'm gonna sacrifice a little life, I'm gonna draw 2 cards a turn, and there's a format, cough, 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 Pioneer, where a lot of the black permanents in that format already just have non-consequential life gain. Like, there's just random life gain on some of these cards. Looking at you, Graveyard Trespasser and Shieldred, right? Like, Shieldred, the big bomb in a lot of these formats, has just non-consequential life gain every time you draw a card. Couple that with Phyrexian Arena, you go Phyrexian Arena on turn 3, Shieldred on turn 4. Wow, this card is going to be super fun. I'm excited to see this card get a reprint, and I have a soft spot in my heart for this card. I don't have a soft spot in my heart for Shieldred because I often try to play aggro and they just play that card and it's like, oh, well, life gain. Great. Speaking of Shieldred, this is one of our broken cards that I think is going to be an auto-include in across a litany of formats because of its versatility. Shieldred's Edict reads, it's a 1/1 black instant, reads choose 1. Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature, same for a creature token, and the same for a planeswalker. The big bonus to this edict, the diverse edict, the versatile edict, is the fact that you get to target a group in which your opponent has to sacrifice something. You're playing against a control strategy, they get to slam that Teferi? Nope. Remove the Teferi. You're playing in Legacy. You got a Merit Lage. The token, 2020 token, just hits the battlefield. Nope. Sack that token. This card's got a lot of versatility. I think it's an auto-include in some formats. Actually, shout out to Capolo and a couple other people on Twitter that pointed me in the right direction on this card and talked about the Merit Lage token that this gets to directly target. This card is very cool. I'm excited to see this card break, you know, not break, but get involved in a lot of formats. But if you think this card is too hyped, if you're not going to play this card, let me know in the comment section below. Or if you're high on this card, the versatility, you're like me, you like your options, I want to hear from you in the comment section below. And before we move on, I want to say, I'm not a fan of tribal strategy. I never have. It's never been something that spoke to me. I used to have an old Wizards deck that I played some of. I've never been too big, but this card makes me excited about Elves. Is Pioneer Elves a thing? It was popular streamer Doomwake that tweeted Pioneer Elves ? Put this card on my radar, and wow, this is super cool. It turns your mana dorks and all your elf dorks with these tap abilities, turns them on right away, lets you untap ones, you get to, you know, twiddle a little bit, and then the last ability, mill 3 cards and you return a creature card with any value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Often when you've built up the elf ball and you have the army with all the ETB and possible draw effects and +1/+1 counters, all you need to do is just slam that 2-drop, trigger everything, draw some cards, and get the engine started again. I really think this card is going to turn on a ton of elf strategies, and I'm actually, again, I've talked a lot about the Pioneer format. Is Pioneer going to be overtaken with so much of this set? Tyvar hitting the meta, hitting our pool right now is going to be really fun. I also think a lot of the community likes to play things like Elves. They like to play Tribal, and this is just a big boost for that portion of the community. So shout out to you guys. I'll be remiss if I wouldn't be, tell you I think I am going to try to play it. In fact, look on this channel for an Explorer video. I might try to play this card in some Explorer. I think it's going to be fun. Now, we've got what might be a controversial card. As we move into cards that I think might be a little overrated, the jury is still out on Minor Misstep. Popular streamer Aspiring Spike also tweeted, Minor Misstep is only good if your opponent puts a spell with cost 1 mana value or less on the stack, otherwise it's useless. A tweet was freaking hilarious, but Minor Misstep targets a very specific number of cards across a very specific number of formats. I know people are looking at this card to be in Modern to kind of be something that you can put in for against Cascade, you can put in against Bobble decks, maybe even Underworld Breach, whatever it might be. But this card is really interesting. I think this card has a chance to make a big impact, but I believe there's part of my brain that goes, we might just be a little high on this card. Hold back yet. And that brings us to cards that I just think the community is way too high on. And the first is Ossification. Now, granted, this effect is really cool. It's an enchant. Ossification's an aura. It says enchant basic land you control. It says when Ossification enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until Ossification leaves the battlefield. So it's another one of those exile effects, those Oblivion Aura, Leyline Binding effects. The interesting part here is it enchants one of your basic lands, and that piece of text makes me think the formats that want these effects more than anything else might really be missing out on this card. The text basic land might be a deal breaker for me. Now, again, in things like Standard, Limited, Pioneer, things of that nature, this card has an opportunity to be a house, really be an answer for a lot of what your opponent wants to do. But that line of text, I can't get past. I have to say that line of text right there could be a deal breaker. Moving on, we have the Bloated Contaminator, and if you're here this long, I know you're going to yell at me, but there's been comparisons of this card to the new card, Old Growth Troll. I guess, wow, I'm old. It's not that new anymore. But Old Growth Troll makes a splash in a lot of these green strategies. First of all, the 3 green pips help with anytime you're playing Nykthos or things of that nature. But Old Growth Troll has a unique effect over the Bloated Contaminator. Bloated Contaminator is 2 and 1 green, so it's a little more versatile. It's got Trample, it's got Toxic 1. There goes that Toxic we were just talking about. It says whenever it deals damage to a player, proliferate. So again, increase those counters. What this doesn't have is kind of what everyone always complains about, dies to removal. Old Growth Troll, when it dies to removal, you get a benefit that then can be recurred for another creature later. This card, not having haste, comes down, has Toxic, so if it does, it's another one of those cards where if it sticks around in these competitive formats, it's going to begin to do work. But unlike the Troll, you have to untap with this card. You have to keep it around. You gotta maybe find a way to protect it, hope your opponent doesn't have removal. And across a lot of these formats, interaction is at a premium right now, and I really think this card is not going to see premier play in a lot of existing strategies. That doesn't mean that there's not a Toxic strategy or something else that hasn't dropped yet that this card won't see play in, but I don't see this thing making big waves in decks that are currently doing work across the litany of formats that we're talking about today. And finally, the last card we're going to talk about. If you made it this long, thank you so much for hanging out. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I say share quickly, but the 2 most important things you can do, you can like the video and you can share this with a friend or group of friends so that we can continue to grow our communities. The sub count is still going up. You guys are amazing, but I want to talk about, to end today's video, Skrels Hive. This card is like buffed Bitterblock, like it's buffed creature generator. Makes me think of like Wedding Announcement, but doesn't have the flip effect, but all the creatures it creates are unique. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1. This creature can't block. It's got Corrupted that says as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. So it gives you a poison counter, gets you a little life. Now, it creates a lot of these dorks, and if you're on the front foot, if you're playing against a strategy that doesn't have a lot of creatures, doesn't have a lot of answers, this card could be a house. But we've seen cards like this with similar effects not really crack into formats or make a lot of noise. I've seen a lot of chatter about this card. I wonder if during spoiler season, this is going to be one of those cards we're hyped on, we're high about, but, you know, come the release, when we try to slot it into decks, it's not really working. Now, again, this prefaces, if there's enough toxic here, enough love for poison counters where we can really start making that a primary strategy in something like, oh, I don't know, Pioneer. Again, standard it probably will be, but in something like Pioneer, this card could have a chance to do some serious work. But I want to know what you think about all my suggestions in the comment section below, and which cards are you most excited to cast to slam or least excited to play against. Until next time, you guys know me. My name is Josh. Thank you so much for hanging out for our spoiler discussion. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye.